listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we're featuring book bans' impact on marginalized communities, a session that was presented at Children's Institute 2024 in New Orleans.
This is a topic, of course, that impacts the entire industry, but it also impacts us all personally via our freedom of expression and free and open access to the things that I'm sure a lot of us love most, which is books. In recent years, we've witnessed an alarming rise in the number of books that are being challenged or outright banned, restricted, removed from public institutions such as libraries and schools across the country. And already this year, there have been a 33% increase in the number of challenges in public libraries and schools from last academic year, according to PEN America, who has been tracking this data. So when we talk about book bans, we need to remember that book banning often targets works that explore diverse perspectives, diverse peoples, challenges to societal norms, things that help us with critical thinking, things that help us to process our experience on this planet. And books are often mirrors and microscopes that help us to, process our experience of everyday life. So when we lose access to that, it impacts all of us. So we're here today to spend some time talking about book banning and the role of independent booksellers in combating those, and especially as it pertains to marginalized communities. So with that, I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to allow the other panelists on the stage to introduce themselves too, so we can get into the discussion. My name is Annastasia Williams. There are a couple of other Anastasias at this conference who I love dearly, even though I just met one of them today and I'm on the hunt for the next one. I come from Knoxville, Tennessee at the Bottom Bookshop. We are a nonprofit Black affirming store. We were created to give honor to those who lost their homes, to be forcibly removed from their homes in the 50s and 60s due to urban renewal. That community was called the Bottom. There's Bottoms, Black neighborhoods all over the US that are similar and have similar stories. And we wanted to impact our community through literature and art. And as you can imagine, being a store that carries titles entirely by Black authors, book banning impacts us greatly. And so it's something that we take very seriously, and we wanted to make sure that we're combating that in a multitude of ways. You wanna go?
Should we clap? I feel like we should clap. That was great.
Thank you. Keep going. Great. Keep clapping. No, just kidding.
My name is Jihye Shin. It's not spelled the way it's pronounced, I know. My pronouns are she, they, and I am from the Nonbinarian Book Bike in Brooklyn, New York.
Woo! Nice. Leah?
Excellent. I thought we were hyped because it was Brooklyn, you know what I mean? Which appropriate reaction. Hey everybody, I'm Leah Johnson. I'm a writer of books for children and young adults, including You Should See Me in a Crown and the fourth... Cut it out. I'm shy, don't. And the forthcoming Black Girl Power, which is out in November, so please pick it up. I also am the owner of Loudmouth Books in Indianapolis, Indiana, which is a bookstore focused on uplifting and highlighting banned books, but also books for, by, and about marginalized people.
Woo!
Oh my God. Also, I'm so sorry, before we get going, I have been sweating since I touched down in New Orleans. So if you take pictures of this panel today, I'm begging you, just turn down the exposure a little bit. Yeah. I can't keep shining like that. You know what I mean? Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Erin Decker. I am the owner of White Rose Books and More in Kissimmee, Florida. My bookstore was conceived because of the book banning and the laws surrounding Florida education. My business partner and I were both school librarians. up until September of 2023. We quit our jobs. We had 2 weeks, and we opened our bookstore in the middle of October.
So we have got an impressive panel up here today to talk about this, and I want you all to know that we've only got a few questions to really go through today, but we hope that by the end of this panel that you'll be empowered and start to pull some strategies into combating book banning in your state, in your bookstore as well. And so once we get through our questions and the things that we want to talk about, we'll have some times for other ideas, but hold off until then when we have that Q&A session until we have that time to open up the floor for that. All right. So we have a variety of experience coming into this panel. Does anyone want to start by talking about how you're addressing threatened books from your perspective as an author, as a bookseller?
Do you want me to start? Okay,
yeah,
sure.
Go for it.
So our store is addressing these issues in a variety of ways. The biggest thing is our banned book selection in our store and how we display that. Florida has tracked over 4,000 separate book challenges, like separate title challenges. So we keep track of that by volunteering for the Florida Freedom to Read project, because they're the ones doing the most work to track that. So we get like a day-by-day playlist of like what's going on in Florida, what's happening at the school board meetings, and we do a lot of ordering surrounding those titles. And then when they come in, we make book talkers that tell like where they're being challenged and why and who's doing the challenging. Is it a parent? Is it Moms for Liberty? Probably. Is it some other person, like that one guy in Clay County who's challenged 2,000 books by himself? So we put those on display cards so people really know what's going on, and like it's only a handful of people that are doing this in the state of Florida because of the way the laws have been rewritten in the last 2 years. We also track like Central Florida and what's happening at the school board meetings, and we do a call for activism to our followers on social media. So we write emails that can be sent to the school boards and superintendents. We put them out on social media, and we ask our followers, if you live in Osceola County, if you live in Orange County, please send this email to your school board member and to the superintendent. And we make suggestions on how they can edit and make it more personalized, so that the school board members aren't just getting the Moms for Liberty take, but they're getting like people who love books and know that literature is good and know that diverse literature is good. They're getting their takes too. So yeah, that's just a couple ways, but.
Sick. Love that. So first of all, there's this narrative that if a book gets challenged or banned, it's gonna have an uptick in sales. Like everybody's gonna rush out and buy it because it's so scandalous. Let me tell you, I've looked at my royalty statement and that is not what's happening, okay? So what is really important to us at Loudmouth in particular is that we keep a really close eye on books that are being banned and challenged, not just nationally, which of course PEN America tracks. We know which books are most banned and challenged, but specifically the books that are coming up in Indiana as challenged titles, and make sure that we're, one, always keeping them on the shelves. We don't carry a quart of songs and other stuff, but we do always have All Boys Aren't Blue on special display. And part of the mission is not to have them in a way that's like, hey, look at this because it's so scary and it's been banned everywhere, but to include it in every season's display. So if we have a specialty display for AAPI Heritage Month, for instance, we make sure that a certain percentage of all the books that we have on display are books that have been widely banned and challenged. And so in addition to having specialty displays in the store for banned books in particular, we also make sure that banned books are a part of every single conversation. So people understand that it's not just the books that you're hearing about most often. It's not just gender, queer, and flamer that are the books that are being banned. It's everybody, and we have to continue to highlight those in really specific but also subtle ways.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah. A little snapperoni back here, thank you.
So, because the Nonbinarian Book Bike is not a store or a bike, it's a little difficult for us to do store displays as such. We're entirely operated, we're a mutual aid organization, so we rely on the donations of time and inventory and support of our friends and family and community. So for us, book bans are kind of a sensitive subject, particularly because, for example, genderqueer is the #1 most contested or challenged book in the country because it's about a queer person. Queer folk and queer narratives are also more likely to be challenged, even though I don't know why. Because it's scary. Because there's sex in it. I couldn't tell you why, but it keeps happening. And so the mission of the bike is that we are just a big, friendly pink bike. It is manual. And we cycle around different neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and we just have it on offer along with other books that y'all might want to see. Our mission statement is everyone deserves to see themselves on the shelf. And it feels particularly hurtful if that's the case and people are banning you, in essence. So that's how we approach it.
Yeah, I think I have a similar experience. Working at the bottom, Black literature has such a small portion of the industry, and to have a book that is banned by a Black author limits that even more. So it's our mission to give visibility to those authors and to those titles especially. And we do that in a variety of ways. We have a monthly book subscription where people subscribe. They pay $20 a month and they get a book that's curated by me. And because it's by me, I get to put what I want. And I make sure to include books that are challenged or commonly banned, because people should be reading the books that are being challenged, and they often are not. So that's one of the reasons and one of the outlets that I do that. We also, at my organization, have a free literature program called Lit Kids, and parents can sign their kiddos up from 0 to 18, and they get a punch card from us, and they get to come in the store and pick out whatever book they want. They have the autonomy to choose something off the shelf. And they get it for free. And so that is a grant-based program. We also get a lot of donations to Lit Kids, and that is another avenue that we promote banned material and give access to just books more broadly to our community members. And through that, we get to do a lot of programming specifically for that group. Story times, of course, but little workshops, and we get to bring in guests. And so those are all free opportunities to delve more deeply into those titles and to talk about them and have discussions with the kids, and get them to build their love of reading, but also understand, some of the barriers to access that are around them and to seeing themselves on the shelves as Jihye. So,
or on the bike.
Yeah, or on the bike.
Right.
So I probably talked about. And we do a lot of education as well, doing panel discussions like this. We've had a few in and through our space where we bring in local community members to talk about book banning and censorship. I always say Tennessee is such a sister state to Florida and Texas, where we see some of the things that are coming out of those states, and then legislators are like, that sounds great, let's copy and paste. So, we do a lot of education, because what we find is that a lot of parents and even educators or people in general don't know how dire it is. They see it, but they don't understand the impact necessarily, and when they hear about it, they're like, oh my gosh, I've got to do something. I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't know it had this big of an impact. And so that education piece is super important. And the rest of my crew, they're actually on their way to the Bonnaroo Music and Arts Festival right now as we speak, just outside of Nashville.
See you there. Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
Are you going to be there for real? Oh my God. Okay. I'll meet you there on Thursday.
Okay, perfect.
But on Saturday, which Leah, you should totally come to this. On Saturday, we're doing another panel discussion on banned books and the state of book banning and censorship in the state of Tennessee. So whenever we have those like big public platforms, we really want to make sure that people are understanding what's going on around censorship.
I just want to add on that, like, I've had the same experience that people really don't understand the impact. They've heard like book banning on the news, but they don't know to what extent or like how close to their community it is. So having those conversations, like just knowing what's going on so you can have those conversations with customers is really interesting. Our book display like has very new titles on it. And we had a customer last week come in and goes, well, all these were banned like 25, 30 years ago, right? And I was like, no, try last week. So yeah, it's interesting to have those conversations and really see like how educated the community is on that subject, because most people don't know.
Also, I know we're talking about banned and challenged books, but because the language of the question is about threatened books, I think it's important to think about all books that have marginalized characters of any kind, whether those are BIPOC characters, queer characters, disabled characters. They are under threat. Like, we know that nearly half of all books that are banned have queer content or content that deals with race or racism, which means that even if they are innocuous in any other way, then those are books that we have to pay special attention to. And I also want to note that y'all know just as well as I do that publishers don't market those books as hard. They're not going to send you those fancy mailings with the crinkle cut paper in them. They're not going to send you the fancy boxes and the tote bags when they're advertising a book by a debut Black trans author. And so it's also our job to think about those books before they've been banned or challenged as books that need extra support from us as booksellers. I'm also saying that because I have a vested interest in you buying those books. So.
I think fundamentally, we're all talking about forms of access. The book bike, at least for me, is certainly, you would think that in a place like New York City, it would be fairly easy to access threatened books, but unfortunately, our city, our mayor and his friends,
Whack.
He's cut the budget to public libraries on Sundays, and in select certain neighborhoods, limited hours or shut down branches entirely on Saturdays. Those neighborhoods are indeed historically Black and brown working class communities. I guess working families don't need to take their kids to the library on the weekends anymore. And so sometimes it's just about, at least in our case, literally bringing the books to the folks that might want them and didn't know they had wanted it. I've had people who come up to me and say, like, we've never had books like this before when I was growing up. And I'm like, that's probably true. And I don't want that to be the case now. I want young people to be able to feel empowered and welcome. And that's only going to happen if they see themselves the way that I wish, other folks would see them. So it really is about access, I think, and not finding books to be a threatened resource.
Yeah.
I just touching on Leah's point a little bit more too. Something we can all do is ask our reps at publishers, can you highlight debut authors that are Black, that are brown, that are LGBTQ for me in your markup so that I can order those books? Because if the libraries are being forced to remove them for whatever reason, they're going to be relying on us to be the ones buying them, or they're going to stop publishing them.
Yeah.
And that's what I think the real threat is that they're going to see a decrease in sales because of library access. And then they're going to be like, these books don't sell, so why are we publishing them? That's my personal fear, and I think that's a real threat to the publishing industry as a whole. So we need to make sure that we are not only buying them, but we're reading them, book talking them, and selling them so that we can reorder them.
Reviewing them on Edelweiss.
Absolutely.
Nominating them for Indie Next, etc.
Tell your bookseller friends in other states, buy this book. It was really good.
I want to go back to a point that you made, Erin, about there's like so few people that are, challenging these books. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the landscape of book banning, especially in Florida, and then maybe we can each talk about what things look like in our state and our community?
Sure. So in Florida, I think it's like 96% of book challenges are coming from politically motivated organizations like Moms for Liberty, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. There's another organization called like No Left Turn in Education. The guy that's in charge of that doesn't have kids in the public school systems, but he's challenged over 2,000 books in Clay County, Florida. And because of the way they rewrote their challenge policy, every single one of those books has been removed from library shelves until it can be reviewed by a committee. So they've had over 2,000 books removed in the last 2 years. So it's this very small number of people, but as a librarian, what we were hearing from our school board when they were removing books out of my county was the only people showing up to school board meetings are Moms for Liberty and the extreme right-wing organizations. They're not hearing from anybody else. So why are they're listening to their voters, quote unquote, so you gotta show up. And if you can't show up, at least listen to the school board meetings so that you can, or the library, public library meetings too, so that you can know what's going on in your community and maybe put out a call to action. Like anytime we hear anything, we can't personally go to the meetings usually, but we'll put a call to action in with like the Democrats of Osceola County, the Democrats of different cities around us, and ask them to show up to the meetings. We put out a call out to like the grassroots organizations like Florida Freedom to Read. ACLU is a really good resource in every state. And if they can't help you, sometimes they can direct you to other grassroots organizations that might be happening around you that can kind of help you, quote unquote, show up to those meetings. So, yeah.
And then ACLU has representatives that can, come to your space. They can do events and like talk more in depth about book banning and some of the work that they're doing on that front. So that's another one that you can request on their website.
And I'll tell you from a library point of perspective as well that the librarians are really tired. They've been fighting this for 4 or 5 years. And it's exhausting. It's heartbreaking. It's so hard when you're in it. I'm so glad I'm out of it right now because I can fight better from the outside. And they really need as much support as we can give them. So if you have relationships with libraries, make sure the librarians you have relationships with know that you are a supportive person and that they can reach out to you if they need help with book challenges.
I think for me, what we should all be thinking about is that this isn't just about a removal of queer books from shelves. It's about a removal of queer people from public life. And so this is the most urgent fight I think we could. Yeah, you can clap. I'm a pause you. Thank you. I was like, I hate when people don't pause for applause. You know what I mean? Like, just let the applause cook. But it's so crucial that all of us think of this as not just an issue from a capitalist perspective, which it is. When books are banned and challenged, they produce less of the books we want to sell. We don't sell those books, et cetera, we lose money. But past that, all of us are invested in the communities that we serve, and every one of your communities has queer people in it, has people of color in it. And if we are not making strides and taking pains to center those narratives and make sure those people feel seen and uplifted within our bookstore spaces, then what are we here for?
Right.
What are we doing? And so it's not just about selling the books. It's not just about what we get on the shelves. It's about us showing up in community spaces and making it clear that we're invested in this, not just from a perspective of people who have businesses to run, but from a perspective of people who want to see our community win, want to see the people who are most threatened succeed. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think that's the most important thing too. It's like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just show up in spaces where people are already doing that work. Which, putting it back to the ACLU are some hustlers, okay? They have the strategies, they have the tools, and borrowing those tools and strategies from a grassroots level is so crucial for us as booksellers.
Yeah, totally agree.
Everything is so connected. Like nothing is we're talking about a small number of people who are very, very coordinated, and that this is a long-term plan and they're executing. If we don't become just as organized and just as, involved, we have to step up, because we're going to get left behind in the dust. And yeah, I mean, it takes everybody coming in and doing what they can, and not just to be aware of book challenges, or not just to, know that, oh, this Black author has this coming out, or this queer person has this coming out. No, that needs to be a major focus of what you're putting in front of the people that frequent your bookstore. Those are the things that people need to see, and those are the topics in the books that you need to challenge publishers to put in front of your face too. Yeah. Okay, so I think I skipped a question at first, but I think we've hit on it. It's just like how these challenges and threats to books impact our specific communities that we work with. Does anyone want to talk a little bit more about that? Or do you think we've covered it?
I mean, I'm happy to chat. I'm a
Let's do
yap.
it, Leah.
One thing about me, I'm a yap. Okay.
Yes. I'm a yap and I'm a gab.
Period.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, look, we are a pretty small bookstore. We highlight BIPOC authors, queer authors, etc. And so we know who we're targeting. I know the people who are coming into my bookstore are little queer weirdos, just like me, and I love that. But I think what's most important to us is we're a block away from a high school, and so after school we get a lot of these little queer weirdos, and they come in, they hang out, and they sit on our bean bags, and they flip through our graphic novels, and they don't buy anything, and that's great, that's fine, we love that. I believe in third places, politically. And when I see these books being banned and challenged and see how they have reduced access, the importance of Loudmouth only becomes more clear to me. Mm-hmm. And so when they come in, they're so happy. Everything in our store is like rainbows and disco balls. And so all these kids, maybe who don't see people who reflect their experience, aren't able to engage in conversations about queerness throughout the day, are able to come into that space and know that even if they don't have any money, which they don't because they're 12, that this is always going to be a space where they can feel seen and heard. And so part of the work of a bookstore, I think, is to figure out how we can extend a hand to these communities who throughout the day maybe are not feeling seen and heard, especially young people, and finding ways to make our spaces more accessible to them. Mm-hmm. Give these kids somewhere to sit down. My God, they just want to sit. They're tired. They're tired. They're working so hard. All they do is talk about testing all day. They want to talk about weird fantasy stuff. Engage them in conversations. Like we can see that like the more the bans and challenges pick up in Indiana, the harder it is for these kids to feel safe to engage in those conversations. And so we try to do that. We're a store full of yappers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the Nonbinarian Book Bike, again, runs on mutual aid, we are not a nonprofit. Companies cannot use us for taxes. Sorry, not sorry. And so it really means that the donations that people provide for us, like they're genuine. At least one of my favorite parts of the mission is providing books for queer kids currently in recovery wards, psych wards. Trans queer youth are disproportionately more likely to be in such facilities. And I mean, it's tough growing up, with puberty and stuff. I can't imagine what it's like now. And to be in an environment where you're told that everything about you is wrong, I can definitely relate to needing a book to escape, right? So one of the things that we do is provide a little bit of like a personal library to these different wards in the different local hospital branches. Specifically, like we don't have like a big sign for it, and it is unfortunately, at least right now, like not paid for at all by the hospital. It's just like the ward nurses and staff members who just feel for the kids so much. They were like, can we get these kids anything? You guys have books. Can we get them books? And we're like, yeah, of course. And sometimes it's the need that's, I think, in our backyards and our front yards that's the most apparent to me in cases like that kind of traditionally do go unaddressed. These are kids that maybe slip between the cracks in schools and different social organizations, and that's also why the mutual aid model, at least for me, is so important. I'm sorry, I'm speaking as loud as I can.
She is shouting back
We're just
here.
gonna put the mic in your mouth.
I want to personalize this a little bit for everyone on the panel. Is there a book that you read growing up that's commonly challenged, banned, that really impacted you? What is that book, and why did it change you?
I'll start with this one. So I was a very sheltered child. I grew up in a Catholic household. I was never the kid that like went to parties or did anything bad. And if you're familiar with Ellen Hopkins' work, she is the most challenged author in the United States right now. I read all of her books when I was like 17, 18, and just like, it just opened my eyes to like what kids and teenagers can go through at such young ages and what they face. And that was when I decided I wanted to work with kids. So in that way, it impacted me because I was like, I could make a difference here. And that's when I went into education as my college major and stayed in that field for 10 years. Her books were challenged in our county, and I was still a librarian at the time, and I fought tooth and nail to keep them because I just think it's so important. If you have, the number one challenged one is Tricks, which is about teenagers getting into prostitution and like how that happens. And we have students that have experienced human trafficking in our school district, and it's like if you can make them feel seen and make them know they're not alone, what is the impact of that versus taking that book away and them not having that opportunity to know that they're not alone? So, I mean, that's kind of one of the more personal stories, I guess, that I have. That book is readily available in our store at all times, but it's not in the school system anymore, which is a shame.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a toss-up between two titles. One of them is Forever by Judy Blume, which has been banned for, at this point, since my mom was in school. And my mom is in her 60s, so, you know, there's that. And also Looking for Alaska by John Green. Now, listen, John Green lives in Indianapolis, so I'm deeply invested in this man's lore. But also, you know, last year, a huge library system in the north side of Indianapolis moved dozens of titles out of YA and into the adult section because they found the titles objectionable for children. And by objectionable, I just mean they didn't just star cis straight white kids going to sock hops in the soda shop, you know what I mean? And so one of those books was Looking for Alaska by John Green. And so all these books had been moved out of YA and into the adult section of this library, and it had kind of gotten crickets. Like, nobody was really paying that much attention to the fact that the entire library system had done this to these titles until John Green comes along and was like, hey, that's messed up, man. Don't do that. And all of a sudden they were like, John Green! Ah! And then they're flipping tables, everything changes, and they moved all the books back. But I say all that to say that, you know, my area of interest is obviously in books about kids of color and queer kids, but this affects a slew of titles. And one of the things that we should be thinking about too is like, how can we all use our different positions of privilege to bring attention to these different titles being banned? I mean, look, I'm Black, I'm queer, surprise, and I'm a woman, also a surprise. But those things which, you know, don't privilege me in a lot of ways, pale in comparison to the fact that, like, I'm also an author with a visible career and got paid a lot of money for my last book deal, and I could use that money to do the work that I wanted to do. And so even though in a lot of ways, all of us are coming at this from different perspectives and have our different marginalities, we also all have different angles that we can take to highlight the issue. And so we don't all have to be John frickin' Green to draw attention to a problem. We just have to show up and show up regularly.
I actually don't have a book. I guess my first thought was the really basic one, Catcher in the Rye, only because I was like, okay, so why is it banned? And people were like, oh, it makes you question authority. And I was like, this is bad, how? But this is an ongoing conversation between a couple of my friends and I, but as a visibly East Asian queer person, I don't know if there is one for us. I guess that's very good and very bad in some ways. It's bad to think of anybody's books being challenged, but it's also kind of interesting that maybe there's a lack of will in terms of industry, or I don't know, maybe there's some godforsaken, I don't know where, create space, self-published somebody who is the next, we got Ocean Wong very recently. We're very happy about that. But I didn't have somebody, right? Well, that's the thing. I didn't have somebody like that when I was a kid. I didn't have a visibly queer East Asian person who was writing books and spoke in my voice. So I don't have one.
Yeah.
Even more reason to protect all those books now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want there to be a kid who could do that. Yeah.
I think for me, I was blessed and cursed with a mother and dad who didn't care at all what I read, and they didn't believe in censorship. My mother let me watch Pretty Woman at 5 years old. Sorry, Mom, I wasn't meant to tell that to the public. Yeah, so I've always had the privilege of reading what I want to read, and I think that's what made me love it so much. And I had a challenging upbringing, and I lived in a challenging household, and to read stories about other kids that had challenging lives made it more bearable. And I also think it was the stories where the kids had even more messed up lives than I did that I loved the most, because I'm like, whew, it's like a little break from what I got to deal with, and I get to be in someone else's drama for a second. And those were just as formative. And I think the one book that comes to mind that I think impacted me the most, The Giver by Lois Lowry. First of all, it was just I had never read anything like it at the time, and I remember I got it from school, and I said, Mom, I think you got to read this with me. And my mom, we never read stuff together. And she's like, okay. And we were both just like, wow. It just made you think. And I never understood why, Jihye, I never understood why someone would want to ban that, because it shifted my whole worldview and how I think about things. And I thought, how creative is this work that, there's a world without color, what? And then there's all of a sudden, someone's carrying the memories of how things used to be. I don't know, that book really impacted me. And I think the second one that comes to mind is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. When I was a little older, I grew up in Iowa. As you can imagine, there is not a lot of Black people in Iowa. And so a lot of my formative years, I was trying to assimilate in, dealing a lot with my identity as a Black girl, and in that environment, and reading The Bluest Eye was such a, I don't know, I related to that book so much, and the desire for the main character to have blue eyes so she can just fit in, so she can have the privilege, so she can, be loved and get some of the same things that people with blue eyes naturally get. And I related to that a lot at the time. And, as I read that book again as an adult, the learning never stops. And I feel like I always pick up something when I read that book, when I read Toni Morrison, and it's sad that it's off the shelves in some cases, and people can't have that experience whenever they want.
I read The Bluest Eye on the train. Don't do that. It's you're gonna ugly cry, so you need a private room kind of book. But I think that's also maybe the danger of why these books are threatened and banned. It's because they fundamentally teach you empathy. They teach you how to be compassionate.
They make you feel feelings.
Big feelings.
Big feelings. All right. We do actually have another question on the slide, so I'll go ahead and ask it now. And we've been addressing some of this already, but are there any more interactions with people from historically marginalized communities centered around this topic that you want to share?
Most of my interactions have been with students. The district I worked in was largely marginalized communities. The school I taught at was 3% white. So those were the students I worked with, were the ones that were Black, brown, and a lot of my students were queer. I worked in middle school and they already knew that, because you do. And I had a student who was always in the library. She checked out 5 books a week and read them all and would tell me all about them. And when our first book challenges came down, Looking for Alaska was checked out by her, and it was one of the books that I was told to remove and send back to district for a review. And so I had to ask her to bring it in, and she looked at me and she said, "You never asked me to bring in my books early." And I said, "I know, because you always bring them back." And she said, "Okay, so why are you asking me to bring it back early?" And I said, "The district wants it back because there was a challenge to the content in it." And she said, "Okay, I'll bring it back tomorrow." And she came back with it the next day, and she had read the whole thing overnight and wrote a letter to the school board.
Period. Queen.
She was 13, so
Icon.
she's amazing. And she asked me if I would take the letter to the school board and read it to them. So I did. But that is probably one of the most powerful interactions I've had, because I hate speaking in public. I have learned to do it because of what's been happening, but at 13 years old, I would have never thought to write a letter to a school board, ever. So she really influenced me in the way that, like, I had to give her a voice, because she could write the letter, but there was no way she could get to the school board meeting. There was no way for her to get that letter to the people that needed to hear it. So.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I could, of course, talk about like the customers that we have come in that I think are particularly relevant to this conversation, but I'd like to shift the frame just slightly to the historically marginalized authors that we work with. So I brought a lot of the homies in when I first opened the store, because I was like, look, we don't have a sales rep. I don't know how to get in contact with nobody. I don't know how to work Edelweiss to submit an event grid. So I'm just gonna text the homies and bring them to the store. And one thing we learned really quickly is that a lot of us who make our living doing school visits have seen a really, really stark decline in the past year or 2 years of being invited to schools to do that work. And so because that's such a huge aspect, not only of the author ecosystem, but also the bookseller ecosystem, like doing school visits, selling to schools is a huge part of what we do. We've had to work so much harder to make sure that those authors stay in front of students. And so while a lot of our books are being banned or challenged or being removed from shelves, there are still schools, probably in all of your communities, that would love to have an author come in. So if you have an author coming to your town on their tour, I beg, let's try so hard to find an audience of young people to put these people in front of. They have so much to say, and it's so valuable. And also, schools, when they know they don't have to pay an honorarium, they don't care about banned books. They're like, please, come on. Like, if we just have you talk to the kids over square pizza at lunchtime, we want you in the room. And so I think figuring out where those pockets of young people are, what schools are amenable to that, and also finding workarounds, I think has been really important for us. And also for the authors that we work with. This store doesn't exist just because we want to make sure that kids, maintain access to these stories. It's so that the folks who write them can continue to have jobs. We know that publishing is risk averse, and like you were saying earlier, if we see that these sales nosedive, which if you sat in on any of the sessions about the middle grade market recently, we know it's not looking too good for a lot of us. And so because we're seeing such a stark decline, that's going to affect marginalized authors more than anybody else. And so what can we do to ensure that those books continue to be sold, but also that those authors continue to get face time with their readers? Yeah.
And you said workarounds. Another workaround, if you can't get them into your public school system for whatever reason, talk to your public libraries, because a lot of times they already have an active audience of teenagers and children, and do an event with them. Make sure you reach out to like private schools, magnet schools, charter schools, whatever. I think a lot of times we forget about those as well. But a lot of times they have even less of a library budget to spend on honorariums. And so they would really appreciate the free visit too.
Right, and by less, I mean zero. In fact, yeah.
Yeah, I taught in private school. I had a zero library budget.
Right.
One of the ways that the Non-Binarian does it is that we just finished our first school visit in May. That's awesome. We were very excited. We're very excited. So we just finished our first school visit to an elementary school. A parent of a non-binary kid had reached out to us and said, it didn't start with, hey, I'm gay, but basically it was, hey, I'm gay and you give out gay books. Do you want to come to the school and do the thing you do about gay books? And we said, yeah, sure. And then it kind of quickly became less of a formal proposal and more of a, the school doesn't really know if they have the money or the budget to host a whole thing, or, the PTA doesn't really think that this is worth the, So we kind of just ended up, there's a playground across the street from the school. So we just kind of opened up shop there, and we had a great time. The kids seemed to like it. And it, in a way, one of the kids, who's an 8-year-old kid who is non-binary, I think had never seen an older non-binary person, like visibly non-binary person before. Queer trans kids are much more likely to die before the age of 35. And for a lot of us, there's, we deserve to grow old. We do. And seeing the third place on wheels that the bike essentially has become for a lot of us, that's also a way to connect. It's a way to show little kids you can grow up this way, you can be you and be happy about it. There are queer authors, just the way that there are queer storytellers, queer parents. It's just another familiar facet of society. So that's kind of how we do it.
Yeah. I think for us, we see so many kids come in and they're not excited about reading because they're just basing that off of what's available to them at their school. And so when they come in and they're part of Lit Kids, or they get access to our books in other ways, they're kind of almost in shock at first that there are so many titles that represent them. Because when they come into our store, that's what they see. If they're Black, they see all kinds of books that represent them. And so I think they come in and I see a lot of shock. And but after the shock, it's I don't know, just like this hunger to see what's there and what's next. And they're pulling all kinds of things off the shelves, and their parents are like, I've never seen them like this. So that is probably one of the most rewarding things that I get to see in my role. We also get a lot of educators coming into the space, and they're wanting to know more about what we do and the resources that we provide. And they're always saying, like, we're sending people to you because we can't do the things that you do, and they're asking for suggestions and things that they could be maybe recommending to their kids but not necessarily have on their shelves. And so we provide a lot of that support to educators as well, and parents. I think there's the parents that we see, they're so busy and there's all kinds of things that they've got going on, and just making sure that they feel seen and taken care of as well through this. And that, I don't know, sometimes it's good to share the joy of reading with their kids, but then sharing that with the parents as well is a joy.
One of the things that at least I think about sometimes being queer is that sometimes it's not a very visible identity, as it were. And I think one of my favorite ones is just an older 50-year-old person who had seen us make the rounds, go, queer books, free queer books, on the bike, and came up and, they picked up a book called The Easy and Quick Guide to Asexuality, and they said, I'm the A. And in that moment, that person made themselves visible to us. And I think that's also one of the things. Like, it's remarkable because that person didn't have to disclose that, but they chose to. And they were an older person, and I don't know,
and they felt safe too.
Exactly. Yeah. I like to put together little guides. They're not quite curricula, but I have a little guide for grades 3 to 5, grades 6 to 8, and then a little list called Resources for Grown-ups. You might be a queer person, late in life queer, who is figuring out parenting, or you might be the parent of a queer child. And one of those resources, is like maybe a virtual book club, like the Good Books, Young Troublemakers book club that Tanvi over there started. It's very cool.
Dog-eared books.
But yeah, it's also, a very hyper-local means of finding the resources and the help that you might need in your backyard.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I guess this is something that we want everyone to think about, is like, what is the role of a non-public entity in addressing book bans? So as you come away from this conversation, that's what we want you to be reflecting on, and then how you can join in on that.
Yeah, I think something that was really important before we talked about all this was we wanted you to have something to take away that you could actually do. So thinking about all the things we've mentioned that we each do, what are some of those things that you could do in your community?
Mm-hmm. I think, as we're talking about the role of non-public entities, which is really, that's a big word for Elmo. But as we're thinking about this, I don't know, especially over the past 2 years of seeing the rise in book bans, of reckoning with the loss of life in Palestine, I believe that we all owe each other more. And I don't know what that's gonna look like for you, but I believe that I owe children more, not just in my community, but globally. I believe that we owe each other more. I believe that all of the communities that you work with are probably really eager and hungry for safety and also being welcomed in and invited in actively. And I think that's what we owe each other. And I don't know what that's gonna look like for you guys, but I know at Loudmouth it means we're gonna keep letting those high schoolers crack those spines and putting them back on the shelf. But for now, if that's what they need from us, then that's what they're gonna get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think sometimes that comes at the expense of our comfort. Yeah. And it comes at the expense of complacency. Mm-hmm. And I'm speaking to myself too. When you say more, I don't know, that's really profound, and I think that's something we should all really reflect on as we move on from this, is what is that more for you? And what are you willing to sacrifice, even if it's just for an hour or a day or whatever, to give that more? It makes a huge difference.
I saw a TikTok, because I'm a scholar. I saw a TikTok a couple months ago where somebody said principles aren't principles until they cost you something. And I really have been sitting with that ever since. Like, what do these values cost me? What am I willing to put on the line to stand on the business that I say I stand on? And so that's the real challenge. It's like, let's identify what our pain points are. Let's identify what our personal shortcomings are, not just as booksellers, but also as people. And let's figure out what we're willing to put on the line for the communities that we say we serve.
And just like thinking of, thinking on that, like make your principles part of your brand for your store, because people will come and support you when they see what you stand for. And it's very important to us that our community knows what we stand for, and we have put everything on the line to open our store. We didn't have a big book deal.
And let me say something about the book deal.
I'm just teasing.
Let me say something about the book deal. You don't know what I gave to the mouse for that book deal.
Girl, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But yeah, people come out because they know what we stand for, and they support that. So put it out there. What do you stand for? What are you supporting? You'll find your people. They'll find you.
I'd say lean on community partnerships too. Like, there are other people in your community, almost guaranteed, that are doing the work. Partner with them and uplift each other. I think that's a huge way that you can get more done and like help yourself stay sustainable through this fight. So I know we have a ton of community partners that we work with, both who, you know, go to the PTA meetings, go to the school board meetings, are involved in local politics, you know, all kinds of things, and like making those connections, making sure that you're partnering in a lot of different ways, making sure that, you know, these topics don't get lost in the conversation and that they're hearing your perspective from a bookseller or an author or, you know, an educator perspective, really, really helps.
How are we doing on time?
Yeah, how are we on time?
10 minutes left.
10 minutes?
Oh, shoot, yeah. 10 minutes, okay, well, I think with that, oh, we had an activity?
Oh, we have homework.
Wow, homework. Write down 3 action items you can do when you return to the store. Maybe we'll take,
Don't share it.
2-3 minutes just to think. And maybe we'll take the best one.
I think this is like an on your own activity, and we can probably open it up to Q&A.
Yeah, okay. So honorary activity, if you'd like to share your 3 things with us at the end,
y'all's got it.
please let us know. You have a question?
Oh, I was just waiting for, are we transitioning to Q&A?
I do think we're transitioning. Right.
My question, I guess, for all of you and for anyone, if you see me, please come talk to me about it. But how do you balance being quote unquote political with making sure that your store is a safe space as well? Like, how do you speak your mind in a way that isn't necessarily enraging or inciting some sort of targeted harassment?
And can you say your name and what store you're from?
Okay, my name is Asia, and I am from Loudmouth Books.
Yeah.
Period.
Hi, Asia.
Period. Yes, I planted people in the audience with questions. You never know.
Okay, so the question is, how do you balance staying politically active with book challenges and creating and maintaining a safe space?
But not just book challenges.
Right.
Just political in general.
activity,
Okay,
whatever.
I hear you. Okay, thank you for
So
clarifying.
this has been like kind of our fear since we opened, because we had a huge piece in the Washington Post about us transitioning from librarians to our bookstore. So this has been a fear. Any contention we've had, we've just called out immediately. Like, we had somebody come bend our little sign that's outside that hangs down on the sidewalk. They came and like bent it in half the day after we got it. And we just like posted about it. We were like, we know this is somebody who hates what we're doing. And it stopped. Like, we haven't had an issue since. If we have issues, we'll address them as they come up. But we make sure like our queer community and our people of color community know that we're a safe space for them. Our entire hallway is decorated in pride flowers that were like handmade by a local artist. So people come in, they see like the rainbow in our hallway and like the trans colors on the other side, and they know they're safe. They see the book selection we have because we put all the books facing out for the most part, and they know they're safe. So, I mean, that's how we do it, but we're gonna stay politically active. People aren't gonna scare us.
I know that's right.
I don't believe that there is a way for us to separate the two.
There it is.
There's, I don't know if y'all remember this because it was before COVID, but
Different life.
a different time. Y'all remember that thing about the gay wedding cake?
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
It's kind of like a legal judo move in a way for me, but I take the same stance. If you are somebody who feels that, you know, you can't be here because these rainbow books threaten you, then get out of my shop.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but
Someone told us once, like, you can't make every single person feel safe if you stand for something.
bet.
And
Well,
that
I don't
is-
want you to feel safe.
And
okay?
that's exactly right. Like we've had people come in and ask for racist books, and we're like, we don't carry those.
Not on my watch.
They don't need to feel safe in my store.
Go.
Right.
They feel safe enough to do that.
You right. You must feel safe to come bring that to me.
They
I
have
would feel
too
violent.
much safety in Florida, let me just say.
Yeah. It's the audacity and the gumption to come
The
up
nerve,
to
the
you.
cheek of it.
Right.
I think, obviously this is a question of particular interest to me, one, because that's my friend and employee, but also, I think, one, my governing principle for my entire life is that institutions will not save us, the people save us. We save each other. And so everybody who works at my store has skin in the game. Like, I employ almost all queer people, almost all people of color, except for our manager, who's a straight white man, but he's an ally.
What's his name?
Kelly. His name's Kelly.
Kelly.
We love Kelly, okay? We love Kelly. Oh, and Kelly's married to Ashley C. Ford, a black woman. I'm sure you've read her book, so he knows the vibe, right? You know her.
Okay.
But that said, I want everybody at Loudmouth to come to work with their principles on their sleeves, on their shoulders, on their backs. Like, I want y'all to stand on that when you come in here. Because to your point, like, when you make what you believe an integral part of the branding of the store, then when people enter in there, you know what the vibe is.
Right.
Everybody in here is standing on the same thing I'm standing on. So everybody is an ambassador for this brand at my store. And so, is that intimidating sometimes politically in a state where we have a lot of violent, straight white men who also just openly carry guns up and down the street. In a state like that, we also safeguard our employees in a lot of ways so that because everybody is vulnerable who works for me, except for Kelly, ally, we make it so that, okay, so there's not one person working at a time. There's always multiple people in the store. People who are more vulnerable don't close by themselves, certainly don't close or open by themselves. We have things set up so that during events, we sort of vet the way that people are able to ask questions or engage with the authors that come in when they want to get books signed. And so we know that those threats exist, but also because we are so clearly who we are at this store, I think we are also able to weed out a lot of the riffraff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, we are, and because we're mission-based nonprofit, we have to stand on our business. And we see what we do as a revolutionary act in and of itself. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that books change lives. And they can shift culture. And that's the tool that we use to be politically active, right? And to be politically minded and to meet the community's needs and to stand in the gap of so many other crazy things that are happening in our state. So yeah, you're right, Jihye, you can't be separated in our mind, and we use the tools that we have to be politically minded and politically active. And I'm very vocal in my newsletter.
I know that's right. If you have a question also, because this session is being recorded, just grab the mic.
We have less than 5 minutes. If you have a question, we'd love to hear it.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey. This is really going to seem like all the questions were plants now, because my name is Megan. I work at Greenlight Bookstore. I'm also a bookseller who helps out with the Nonbinarian Book Bike in Brooklyn. Hi, Jihye. So my question, I know this is something that we talk about a lot with the Nonbinarian, that we are in a state that is not actively banning books, although the mayor is trying to close our libraries.
Boo.
We hate him. The petitions are online if y'all want to sign them, even if you're not in New York. Please do it. But it's a conversation that we have a lot, that we're not, actively in a state that's having these book banning laws. And I think it's something that we kind of hear people say, well, is this our problem because we're not directly having these laws passed? So I think you guys have addressed it a little bit, but I'd love for you to talk maybe a little more directly to what are things that we in states that aren't passing those laws can do to support people who are in those states, and also what are the ways that still affects you, so that when those customers do come in and say that to us, what do you say to that?
So even if you guys aren't passing laws in New York or California or some other places, there is still book banning happening in your state. Mm-hmm. There are still counties that are red, places that are red in your state, and it is still happening. Pay attention to that, because I know my husband's from Long Island, and there is book banning happening on Long Island. So that's that may be a more local problem instead of a statewide problem, but you still need to pay attention, because it's like a disease. It spreads. These Moms for Liberty chapters are everywhere now. But I mean, as far as supporting other states like Florida and Texas and Tennessee, where the laws are really, really restrictive, donate to the organizations if you can that are doing the fighting, the grassroots. PEN America is doing a lot of tracking. There's a Florida Freedom to Read, a Texas Freedom to Read organization. There's a whole bunch. Just, find those organizations, follow them on Facebook, share. Because even if most of your community is in your state, you may find people that have relatives in those other states that need support too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think to that end, another thing to think about is if you are a store who has active social media, use that social media to uplift other stores who are specifically working with marginalized communities. There are a lot of bookstores that only sell Black books, only sell queer titles, only sell, we are very specific in what we do. And if you are a general interest bookstore with a lot of followers on your social or an engaged audience, then use different heritage months and specialty weeks and big days to really highlight other bookstores. I think rising tides raise all ships, and if you win, I win. And I know that's antitrust or whatever, but I do believe that.
I also think, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and we need to come at it from that perspective, 100%. So if it's donating money, if it's giving visibility to what other organizations are doing, it's important to know what is going on in other states. And that's why when we go to places like Bonnaroo and we have people from all over the country engaging with us in that platform, yes, we're talking about Tennessee, but we're also talking about how it impacts them anywhere in this country and how they can get involved, whether they're in a state that's, most impacted by these book challenges and bans or not. The education piece is really key in that regard too.
Buy the books.
Yes.
Period.
We actually do need to wrap up. Do you have one more?
It wasn't a question.
Okay.
Ruth Linka, Orca Book Publishers in Canada. We have some books banned in Canada and in the U.S. And this morning in Renee Watson's talk, I wrote down, joy is resistance. And I just want to say thank you. You guys epitomize that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!